Good afternoon and welcome to Black Mental Health Matters.
Good afternoon.
I'm having a bit of technical challenge from my end with my internet. So I'm asking Sister to take over. Ladies, I'm sorry about that. Let us take this from the top.
Okay. Yes, so good afternoon and welcome to another Black Women. And today's topic is how a process of healing and resting. We're very honored to have you. Welcome all. And maybe we start by asking for, can you hear clearly?
Yes, I can.
You can? Okay. So, yes, we start by ourselves. Um, Trina, would you like to? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. But we don't get it. LaDonna,
Hello.
Okay. Go ahead, please. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you say that again?
Please go ahead and
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah,
Same
you keep
thing.
fading in and out. I can't hear you.
Well, I guess I'll try to start. I'm LaDonna of Ebony Notes. I have a stationary and a mobile app that is here to improve mental health in the Black community. I am a teacher, a mother, and a spouse, and that's me. I'm LaDonna.
Um, Based on the picture, I'll go ahead next. My name is Trina Casey. I'm a certified cognitive behavioral therapy life coach and mentor. I also focus on emotional intelligence while I'm coaching and mentoring and counseling young Black women from all over the United States and the world to help them learn how to love themselves compassionately. And I practice something called radical compassion, and I help them see the hegemonic forces that actually have caused them trauma and learn them how to love themselves out of that so that they can stop beating themselves up. And I'm also a published children's books author that writes books that teach children emotional intelligence through real life situations and stories that traumatize us all. So that's who I am. Go ahead and mute myself.
thank you.
Hi, I am Auset. I'm the co-founder of the African Calendar, together with my partner Ta Gray, and I'm also a advocate for humanity and a consultant for intercultural. Sorry, I hope you didn't hear that. I'm not at home. And also a consultant for intercultural humanity. What we do is we share the origin, the evolution, and history of humanity, which started in Africa and has a great story that, well, we as humanity have forgotten where we came from and who we are as humans. And that's what we teach in schools. We give lectures, we give trainings and consultants to school programs, but also in business. So that's who I am. Thank you. I don't know if this question was for me, but what the celebration means to me personally, I think Juneteenth is a great example for the world to see how well white people have been able to keep things for themselves and to keep knowledge from us, and which is imperative for us to glow and to grow in who we are. And I think that is a great example of how we should also come to grips that knowledge of our history, our culture, our legacy, our traditions, and rituals are imperative for us to come together as a group, as a whole. And I'm in Europe, but I've always known about Juneteenth, and I think it's a matter of us exchanging those cultural legacies and the traditions that will empower us and inspire cohesion amongst us globally.
For me, Juneteenth means that we are honoring our past and recognizing the history and the resilience of those that came before us. Today, when I think about Juneteenth, while honoring the past, I like to focus on Black joy, Black healing, and Black excellence when I am celebrating and speaking about how it makes me feel and what it means to me personally.
For me, Juneteenth is a day of education. Matter of fact, several of my clients that I did speak to today weren't sure what Juneteenth was about. And so I feel, and all my clients are Black women. So one of the things that I try to make sure I do is educate as much as I can about these historical and very important facts in our community, because so much of that information is hidden from us, and so much of that information is distorted and disinformed. So Juneteenth for me is a day for education, for celebration, for healing, because we don't know what we don't know. And if we don't know, we can't heal from it. Was that for me? Auset, okay.
So I think that the question is, in what ways does recognizing Juneteenth contribute to healing? I think because of the fact that what was done to one of us was done to all of us. And we need to realize that it was just a matter of where you were situated. We need to know about our collective history to reach understanding and awareness of how massive the effects of our mental health was on each of us. So it's Juneteenth concerns me just as much as the freedom of Haiti affects me. It affects me just as much as Brazil was has continued the enslavement of our people for 25 years longer. It concerns me because it was just a matter of where we were situated, and we are a collective, and we need to seek that cohesion all the time. I think it will contribute largely to our mental health, our mental well-being, and understanding and recognition.
And to add to that, I just think that once we recognize and acknowledge what happened, that way that we know how to move forward. Because if we don't acknowledge the past, we're bound to repeat those things. So with us recognizing Juneteenth, I believe that contributes to our healing, because we recognize what happened and we recognize that struggle and we recognize that resilience, and then we find a way to move forward today by celebrating.
Okay, so recognizing Juneteenth is much like what I was saying before. We don't know what we don't know. Our education around our holidays contribute to our healings. I will just mirror what Auset and LaDonna said, because many of us don't understand the roots of this holiday. So if we don't understand it, I say to my clients, name it to tame it. And that means you got to understand what you're feeling emotionally, and you have to be able to put a name to those emotions in order to heal them, or you're just floating in the ethers, kind of like grabbing at reasons and straws that don't actually contribute to deep healing. So diagnostic statistical manual. Oh, no, it does not. I love that statement. I just had a conversation. DSM-5 does not include intergenerational trauma, and it is definitely needed. Much of the DSM-5, I think, should be redone, and ignored at this point, because I find most mental health diagnoses are actually responses to oppression, and on many levels, not just intergenerational.
Yes, so intergenerational trauma is the way it's being passed down is through our mentality. It's being passed down in the way we react, we respond to things, our reflexes that were passed down from us from grandfather, grandparents, parents to children, the way we interact with each other, the way we look, the way we speak. It's all in our mimic, in our tone of voice. That's how generational trauma is being passed down. It's not only the personal experience that's being passed down, but it's the effects, the emotional effects, the mental effects that contribute to passing it down to our children without us even knowing it. We do it in a reflex. And so to me, that is intergenerational trauma being passed down from one to another. And in this case, it concerns a collective. It's not only being passed down from parents, grandparents, parents to children, but it's also in our communities. We react and we respond the same to our trauma that we have been through.
Okay, I'm going to rejoin you and ask some questions around. One of the things I want to know is how can that acknowledgement be a catalyst for our intergenerational conversation about trauma, resilience, and healing within families and communities? And feel free to answer anyone who wants to jump in and give the answer to that question. Heard me?
Do you mind repeating it one more time, because you broke up a little bit in between, so I wasn't sure. Okay.
How can the acknowledgement of Juneteenth be a catalyst for intergenerational conversations about trauma, resilience, and healing within families and communities? If you did not hear me, I'm going to post the question.
I'm going to go ahead and just hop in by saying that by sharing those stories and experiences and acknowledging Juneteenth, like our families can bridge that gap between the different generations, and we won't have, like you
And one
said,
person,
Trina. Oh, like you said, you had some patients that you saw today that didn't even know what Juneteenth was about. And if we have those conversations in our communities, within our families, we can help to to bridge that gap so that we know what it is, and then it will help us to have that safe space for healing, for growth, and for that support that we need.
And I would like to add to that that traditions have a function of creating social stability.
also response. But then one last question.
Can you hear me? Okay. I just said like traditions have a function of creating social stability. That is what their main function is, and it leads to cohesion. In this case, Juneteenth isn't just important for Black Americans, but it's also imperative for the global Black family. It is important to know our stories as to bring awareness, understanding, and a deeper connection. And this goes for all our history and all our cultural legacy. So. Um, like on the 1st of July, for instance, the Surinamese people and the people from Curacao celebrate Kitikoti, which means broken chains. We need to share all of these stories with each other and massively talk about them on social media so we can create a greater awareness of what we have all been through. And I think those traditions, even in the world, when celebrating a certain tradition like Carnival or Christmas or whatever, it brings a cohesion amongst each other. We recognize each other in those traditions. And I think it's imperative for us to embrace our cultural identity, our cultural legacy, and not our cultural image that was created for us, not by us.
That's beautiful, and I really like that point, Osset, because as a global citizen myself, I lived in Amsterdam, as we talked about in the past, and for 6 years, and I'm also in Africa now for almost 3, and I travel all around the world as a Black woman, and what comes with me as a Black woman is the same prejudices and the same stereotypes and violence even, because they're the way that we have been reduced as people globally. So recognizing Juneteenth as a global holiday, I think is really important because it kind of uplifts us to a level of acceptance, of resiliency that we have had to have, being the global minority, of this world. Even though our contributions have outweighed that oppression, you know, there's not a place in this world where Black excellence hasn't existed. So I think Juneteenth should be something that should be seen everywhere and not just used as a profiteering, and not used as a new holiday like Christmas, like Easter, like all of these other things. I've seen some absolutely disrespectful ads and things happen in the United States where our faces, our melanin were actually erased from the advertisement anyway, because it's like anything that's worth having gets colonized. So yeah. Can you hear me better now? All right.
And Trina, I completely agree with that. And then I just want to piggyback on what you said, and come back to what Auset said. Am I saying your name right? Auset? I think so. I hope so. Okay. Um, As an educator and seeing what is happening mainly like in Florida, how they're trying to erase Black history from history books and everything, and erase those courses and everything, I think that brings us really strongly to that point where Trina, where you were talking about at the beginning, it's about educating, because we cannot depend on others to educate us. Because it just get whitewashed, it get watered down, and they don't tell our stories accurately. And I think that it depends on us to share our stories in our own voice, our own experiences, in order for it to be carried down from generation to generation and be accurate.
Absolutely. That,
I agree with
I'm always,
yeah.
yeah, I'm taken aback sometimes that we don't tell our stories. And I wonder why our oral traditions have been put on the back burner, and why we no longer respect the stories of our elders. And that's because that we as a community have been, really psychologically um, oppressed and emotionally damaged by a perception of who we are. It's self hate, and so we don't have that oral tradition and respect for our storytellers and our elders anymore because we're actually told not to trust each other.
I want to ask a question after hearing you, Trina. How do we change that? How do we go back to that place of telling our stories? How do we create that setting where we can tell our stories to our generation and encourage them to continue to tell their stories or our stories rather, so that the healing can take place?
Well, one of the things that I see that is sorely missed is platforms for our voice. What we have done over the years is we acclimate and we sort of kind of meld into the platforms created by white people and colonizers and expect them to uh, allow us to speak our voice when we should be creating our own platforms, a safe space for us to speak and tell our stories and share our stories. Because one of the things is that even though platforms and like LinkedIn and stuff like that exist, they're always hostile. And many times I feel like we hold ourselves back, and you can't really be authentic and share who you are and share our culture as we are now. How can we heal if we don't have a platform to do that? So I think number one, that would be the first step, is to create platforms where we are able to speak freely and with support and love, and make those safe spaces, make them places for education, make them places for sisterly love and brotherly love and compassion, where there is no denomination. It's just about being one with our melanated selves from all around the world. You know, it doesn't have to be just African American, or it doesn't have to be just, one group or the other. It could be a global community, because I think globally we long for that connection, and we feel the deprivation of not having our stories and our ancestors held closely to our hearts.
I like what you said, Trina, because I know coming out of the Caribbean, there's some Caribbean communities that make sure to tell their stories to their children
Mhm.
for several generations, where people can actually trace back their roots back in places like Asia. And I see this among the Indian community here, where they're always telling their story, not just from a religious perspective, but from a social perspective as well. But I know for me, it is challenging in that going to school, I was taught European history or history from a European perspective. And it's not like you have the elders in your community who will share. There was still that concept. And I guess it was something that we inherited from the plantation where you weren't supposed to be heard, as kids. You're not supposed to be heard. And that has spilled over into our community today where voices of young Black children are still not heard.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on
that
that?
is that's normal though, because the seen and not heard is a attribute and spillover from slavery. You know, that is a conditioning that we as a community have to break through. We have to break through that trauma of being afraid to speak up, and also not being able to be our authentic selves in a public forum, and even in a private forum. There's a lot of healing that needs to start with our elders and ourselves. And I think that ending this generational trauma will start with acknowledging that there needs to be a stop point, that we need that safe space for us to heal. We need it. And so, I know there's a couple sisters on LinkedIn that are launching a platform actually today. Liz Hurley and Lisa uh,
Oh,
Hurley, and yeah, the Great Exhale. And I was fortunate to have them on my podcast, and we talked about this. So, but also I think the education, you mentioned the Caribbean, uh, uh, and colonial history being taught. I think one of the things that we need to get back rooted in, and this goes to Auset's calendar and what she's doing with her
that's where
partner,
I am. I'm in
is we
Barbados, and yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, we need to re-educate African history, because we have forgotten our greatness. We've been reduced to slaves in most history books.
And excuse me, I just wanted to pop in and add something personal that I have just noticed, and I don't even understand where the disconnect is. I am in my 30s, my mother is 60, and my children are preteen teens. My grandmother, I remember growing up and going to stay at her house with my other cousins, and her just sitting and telling us stories. Like
Mhm.
we know about her time in Mississippi. We know about her time living on like a cotton plantation. We know about like all of that. But when I look at my children and my mother, she doesn't sit and just tell stories about like her childhood and where she come from. And I
Mhm.
don't understand like where the shift happened, but I know my grandmother would just share. And even now, we just had a big family gathering. I hosted it. It was a lot of us because she had 15 kids, and anyone who was in the room where she was sitting in the area, she was just telling these different stories of like things that happened when her kids were kids, things that happened when she was a kid. And I don't know where the shift came, because I think that I would probably be in my mom's shoes, because just looking at how things are heading and how we're kind of being more I don't know, would modernized be the word? Um, I
Not
don't
modernized.
understand it, because I when I look at my mother, and it's not a bad thing, I don't see her doing what my grandmother did at the same age. It's like it's not the same at all.
Uh, I can answer that from my perspective, and I've just had a conversation with somebody about this. Shame has been instilled into the generation. I would say more than anything, a shame of poverty, a shame of slavery. My mother does not know half of the things that my aunt is the storyteller of the family, but that's because she wants to pass on that oral tradition. But there's so much trauma behind it. I think that I think a lot of this generation has shut down because they're tired. You know, the stories are not, even though your grandmother and your grandmother's grandmother still had a semblance of, look what we did. I think that our generation has really drank the Kool-Aid of colonialism, and also the mental anguish and trauma caused by colonialism has taken over our love of self and joy of the fact that we're still here, you know. um I just think shame has been just a part of it, and I think that a lot of us won't admit that.
Yeah, and to add to that, for instance, I live in Europe, in the Netherlands, Amsterdam, and I know that my mom, she's from Suriname, Haiti, and in Suriname we had that oral passing down of things. And like you said, Donna, I think modernization also has something to do with it, because now that I live in Europe, we're actually fighting racism and discrimination, and we're fighting other things. And that becomes our stories. And we do not share anymore the history previous to that. I do so with my children, but I'm one in a million. I take my children aside and uh, go to grandma, and then we talk about the fun things that she did in Suriname, or things that she has been through. Uh, but most of us are not busy with that anymore. We're busy surviving. We're busy fighting racism and discrimination, and all of the problems that we have met here in Europe, which Trina can acknowledge. Like, for one instance, we have a tradition here called Sinterklaas, and
Oof.
Sinterklaas has a companion, Blackface, and he arrives in a ship with all these, yeah, blackface people, white blackface people painted blackface, and they entertain the children. So these are the things that we are fighting here. And yes, we do know that it has a relationship with slavery, but the personal stories that actually contribute to the emotional wealth, and getting to know what we are fighting against, that is actually left behind. And I think that is one of the things, at least here in Europe. I think it might be different when you are in the States, where you've been through all of that, and the institutional racism is in your face, and the whole history is attached to that. Out here, it's a little different, and maybe Sonia can confirm to that as well as in the Caribbean. I don't know where are you from? From the Caribbeans?
Barbados, I think she said.
Oh, Barbados. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I'm from
Yeah,
the Caribbean. I'm in Barbados.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's different. It's also like negative stereotyping of our communities. We really do have an internalized dialogue that has been perpetuated on us for a very long time. That, I think the most heinous crime is not the chains that were on our bodies, but the chains that are on our minds to this day. Yeah, we really we have a problem with letting go of the ideologies around colorism, hair texture, and mimicry, of European standards, because it means that we're quote unquote a higher class or better, and I come from a pretty mixed background, of both Carib and American and Native American. and even some Indian, from Punjab. So there's always like this caste system that that's at play in our minds, and unless we bring that to the surface and call it for what it is, we're always going to be in conflict with each other, in the diaspora. So yeah.
Yeah, and except for the fact that we have been negatively stereotyped.
I'm going to ask this question. So, how can we change that conflict? Because I know, yeah, I know for the Caribbean, most of us are mixed with so many different ethnic groups. So, how do we change that conflict? How can we eliminate that conflict, so to speak?
Like I
I,
said, the platform. We have to create something that's cohesive for all of us. You know,
and
LaDonna's.
I think that it starts at home first. Because if you look at the root of it, is because we're not sharing. We're not sharing our stories. We're not there. So I think we have to start at home, with sharing our stories in a safe space without any type of, I don't know, negative connotation to it. Because even though that's where we come from, even though it may have been bad then, but look at where we are now. And then after we started home with educating, in the home, then we can spread that out to the communities. We do need that safe space. We do need those platforms, but I don't see it shared enough, like in our own community. I don't see. I think there might have been one event here, and it wasn't focused on like educating and sharing those stories. So I feel like that in our community, home first, community, and then we have those platforms where we can take it to a global level.
I also think there needs to be a commitment to mental health. And I think that until we admit just how much trauma we have experienced individually and as a trauma, and just like, I've been trying to create um, a retreat called Family Trauma Rehabilitation Retreat, where your mom and your sister, your dad and your brother, your children, you all go on a holiday together to get out of these stressful entire environments that make it hard to heal, because we're all in this survival mode rather than a thrive mode. And so sometimes we need to get out of those type of environments in order for us to just be able to ground in ourselves. um, but we need to get really honest about our trauma so that we can start healing it. I don't think there's anybody on this. Yes, so much denial. That's the big part of it. We are in denial of our trauma because we have to wear the crown of strong black woman, or strong black man, or whatever that is. And it's really harmed us as a community. And it's also created unsafe, mentally unsafe places where it is seen as weakness to cry. It is seen as weakness to ask for help. There are tendencies for families to abandon other family members in need, because that's what happened on the plantation. You couldn't be weak. You couldn't show love and care to your children because you didn't know if they were going to be taken away from you. And also you didn't want. And there was a video I saw where they one of the epigenetic um, consequences of slavery was that we would put down our children intelligence, capability, because we didn't want them to be sold. So if the slave owner said, "Oh, your son is so intelligent," and da, 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 "Oh no, he's a handful. He's hard to deal with. He's a pain in the butt." Where if you have a conversation with a white woman or another person in the community, they'll lift up their children and say, "Oh yes, my son is this and that." But we have a tendency to downplay our own children, and they hear that, they feel that, but they don't understand it's coming from actually a place of fear and even kind of love, because we don't want them to be harmed by or taken away from us. Yeah. Yes, persistent enslavement system trauma. Yes, pest. It's exactly what it is. And so we need to really acknowledge those things. And I love the trend of us speaking up. And I tell my son all the time about how our ancestors, history, inventors, all these things, to the point of where he's nauseated by it. But I said, I need you to know we come from greatness.
I wanted to speak
Yeah.
to that denial part. And when it comes to like trauma, if we don't even recognize that there is trauma, how can we heal? Um, when even like with the app that I have, Ebony Notes, it's like positive affirmations to the for the culture. Um, but I think about how growing up, there was no speak of like talking about your feelings. There was no speak about seeking therapy. Oh, we just gonna pray about it. Was a big thing, and sometimes you need a little more than that. So I think that the ways that we can empower one another for true health and holistic wellness is to recognize that we need to heal. We have to recognize that there is trauma. We have to recognize that there are um, some um, some strategies and some methods out there that can help us mentally. Because, like you said, Trina, we were taught like we're strong. We have to be strong. We cannot be weak. We cannot show that side of us. And then I think it takes it back to me growing up. Don't talk about what happened in my house. And even as an adult, I had to come out of that. Don't What happens in my house stays in my house, because I was holding on to a lot of stuff by myself and carrying this weight by myself. Um, I want to speak to. I didn't even seek help like from a professional until I was like well in my 30s. And had this been something that had been I don't know, recognized in my community, I wouldn't have carried so much weight on my own for so long. So in order for us to like empower one another, we have to let people know that it's okay that you're having a difficult time right now. It's okay. How can we support you? Is the question that we need to be asking one another. How can we support you in this time, in your time of need?
How can we let go of the shame and self judgment so that we can lift each other up instead of putting each other down? How?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of our lives are covered in a fear of reaching out and saying, I need my sister, I need my brother, I need my community. Because my white doctor does not understand my journey. How can you help me, and not shame me? How can you change your habits and reflection of self? And I think that this generation is the generation to start doing that.
Yeah, I think we've been living in constant fear during slavery, and we still are. And it's stressful. And the thing with that is we walk around with this frustration and this anger built up inside of us. but we are not allowed to show any emotions. We never had the time to heal. We never had the time to express ourselves. We always had to hold back, and it brings even more stress and frustration with it. We are in this cycle we want to break out of, but are kept in this cycle due to laws, due to institutional racism, to rules, to protecting the lives that we have on the job, in school. We teach our children, one of the things we teach our children, I never taught my children this, but my mom taught me that your diploma is your husband. That's what she always said. Your diploma is your husband. Meaning that my diploma is gonna, it can exchange a man, a partner. Or we teach our children work 3 times or 5 times or 10 times harder. That is internalized racism because we tell our children constantly that they're not good enough. They're not good enough to be themselves. They have to they have to be better than anyone else and to work 10 times harder. So I think part of that is so frustrating on even our children. Like you said, Trina, me myself, I sit my children down and I kind of lecture them because I want them to know. I want them to feel empowered of where we come from. But sometimes I also notice in myself that I'm bringing it to them as if it's like a punishment for them to
Mm,
listen to.
mm,
And
mm,
I want them to find joy in it. But it's
mm,
become so important to us, that piece of trauma that we didn't have, that we,
mm,
yeah, unconsciously pass it down to them. And sometimes they're like irritated with me. And I go like, okay, I gotta quit now. Because
mm,
I think you and LaDonna, just like me, and all the others, this thing has consumed us.
mm.
24/7, we are busy with it. And
Yes.
we don't have time to breathe because we're fighting against the clock. We want our children to not go through this on a later age in their life. We want them to be empowered now.
Mhm.
And that is sometimes so frustrating.
I
Yeah.
love how self-aware you were with what you said. I love how self-aware you were with you say it's irritating. I feel that too. I feel that with our son, my son too. And and like you said, you have to catch yourself because you want it to be something of joy. And I think this is why Juneteenth is like a perfect opportunity for that because it is grand. It's a holiday, it's a celebration. It's like Black Christmas. You know what I mean? That's what if we had the platform to create it in that way for our kids where there were I remember Kwanzaa was on its way to doing something like that where people dressed up and they had the garb and they had everything that would celebrate African like Christmas, you know? But it faded at some point. And I don't remember when it faded, but man, I really want our children to have joy in celebrating their heritage, not just mom going, you have to know about Joseph Billon Chevalier. He was a violinist and much, much more, you know.
Yeah.
They're sucked into their Game Boys and all that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So that is one of the things why we created the African calendar, is to share the history and the cultural legacy. And with that, our cultural legacy, it harbors our norms, our values, our morals, and our principles. And rituals are a great part of that. Rituals are like secret passwords. Like, for instance, you and me standing at a coffee machine, and I'm getting this coffee, and I'm putting in honey instead of sugar. And immediately, if you do the same, you'll go like, "Oh, you put in honey. I do that. I do the same thing. And we have immediate connection. So that is what rituals are. Like Thanksgiving, people eat turkey. It's kind of like a ritual that you recognize in others and you can share. And I think that is one of the things that is missing. We are celebrating, but we are not lively celebrating the rituals. And that is also because we're oppressed, where it's like we're not allowed to go outside and to celebrate, like Independence Day with fireworks or something like that. We're constricted to keep it to our families or within our communities. And which is a good thing, because I do think we need to start with us first. But we need leverage to carry those rituals that sustain our norms and our values and why we are doing this. And other cultures or ethnicities have had thousands of years, thousands of years to create their culture and define their cultural identity. We are just starting. We are the youngest cultural identity in the world. That's what we have. And while we're the oldest, I mean, we were the start of civilization. So we have the most knowledge, but it's been taken and stolen from us. And one of the things I think is very important is that we reconnect back to our Africanness in each way. I mean, I used to grow up, my mom telling me, I'm not African, I'm Surinamese. And it wasn't until later that she started to accept that fact that we are from Africa. And I think that's powerful. It's powerful when you can actually embrace that part of you, because that means that all people all around the world, black like you, are from Africa. And then you will see how large and great we are. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that. There was a term that I heard was chosa. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember the acronym, what it was for, but it's basically the same thing as Africans taken away by force out of Africa. And we are everywhere in the world. And when I talk about radical compassion, it's that acknowledgement that everyone in the skin that we're in, no matter the gradient of it, we're all living the same experience in some way. We've all had the same experience in some way. So we have to look outside of ourselves for one reason only. We need to look at the hegemonic forces. And the word hegemony is a huge part of my platform. And if you don't know what hegemony is, it's basically the ruling classes in power of this world that make us think, eat, sleep, be a certain way. And they control the narrative of what that way is. So the reason why you need to understand that out macro to understand your micro is how you're going to get the radical compassion, because we didn't create this. We practice Ubuntu, we practice welcoming, we practice love in Africa, but we were forced into a different mind state that harmed us. So we need to give ourselves a break. We need to give ourselves a break. So that's what radical compassion is. Because if you don't start with self-love, it's hard to love everyone else.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like a broken person, can't help another person heal. So like if you don't love yourself, how can you love others? Um, but bringing this back to Juneteenth, and what I have with my app with the wellness and positive affirmations. My whole tagline is that I'm bringing Black joy, Black healing, and Black excellence to your pocket. And I feel like that's what we are doing with Juneteenth as we celebrate it. And if we look at that, the Black joy and the Black healing and the Black excellence, we can connect that to empowerment. And we can connect that to us putting our wellness first. Um, And if we are looking to celebrate Juneteenth, I think that we can seek that empowerment through positive affirmations. Because through systemic racism, we've been told the opposite of ourselves. We have started, like, I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like a lot of us speak negatively to ourselves. We're not very kind to
That,
ourselves,
that.
and we need that those positive affirmations, and we need to look at Juneteenth as more than like a celebration, something that we honor with, like you said, education, with empowerment, because I feel like that education and empowerment go hand in hand. And then that last element would be rest. We need to honor ourselves with rest because we've been told so long that we need to grind and that we need to hustle. And I don't feel like we rest enough. The power of rest. And I feel like sometimes it might be ingrained enough that we feel like that we're not worthy to rest.
Mm,
So with that, with celebrating Juneteenth, we have to, honor it all with that education and empowerment, that positive self-talk and rest.
yes. Mm.
Thank you, LaDonna. Um, well, thank you all for listening. It was a great pleasure listening also to Trina and LaDonna with their expertise and their empowering words of wisdom. Thank you very much for having me on this panel.
And as well, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been very enlightening and uplifting. I love seeing the faces and hearing the voices of my melanated sisters all over the world. And I wish everyone a beautiful Juneteenth. This create a beautiful family tradition and rooted in Africa and rooted in self love. Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in, and happy Juneteenth. And I just appreciate the opportunity to speak amongst such greatness because y'all are great. And I learned so much, and I was happy to share so much. So go on and educate